Well, welcome. My name is Ed Sewell, and on behalf of the Georgetown Business Ethics Institute, I'd like to welcome all of you here today. I'd like to also extend a special thanks to Ryan Connors, if he's here, for doing the publicity and a lot of the organization of this event. I'd also like to welcome our viewers from C-SPAN. In addition, I want to extend a very warm Georgetown welcome to today's speaker, who about 25 years ago opened a single shop in Brighton, England, with a business plan that I think a lot of you business majors in the room would admire. It said this, as best I can tell. It said, sell natural cosmetics in refillable containers. Tweak it as we go along. Very little capital. Very little, if any, industry experience, and most importantly, no discernible market for what she was up to. In other words, this business would have resembled the schematic for a bumblebee, a cute little thing, but no way is it going to fly. Well, it did fly. Today, the body shop operates out of 1,800 locations. It serves 84 million customers, which raises the obvious question, why? And how did that happen? I think the answer lies in the woman who's going to spend a little bit of time with us today, who did what I would suggest to you is arguably the hardest thing that anybody in business ever undertakes. And that is that she saw a market where one didn't exist. Moreover, she had the tenacity of a lunatic to make it real. This doesn't happen very often. And this is no small feat, but that's not, at least from my standpoint, the really important part of the story. The important part I want to suggest to you is about how she did it and the example that she set in going about creating this business this way. The example I would offer to you is describable as this. She's proof positive that building a business and making money does not require that we abandon serious human values. Now, her new book, its title is shown behind me, chronicles both of these stories, the business story and the human story, and it does it with a passion that you don't normally see in CEO literature. In fact, I want to suggest to you that this doesn't qualify as CEO literature, because I read it this weekend and there was not one instance of chest-pounding, self-congratulatory platitudes in the entire book. What you do get in this book is you get to go inside the place. Not into the boardroom where you usually go. I doubt you guys even have a boardroom. Instead, you go into what the author describes as the original core of the business and of the woman whose life it reflects. In philosophy, we call this a soul. What you find in there is a very refreshing and hopeful message, and it's my extreme pleasure to introduce the author of that book, Anita Roddick.
Thanks. I love intimacies. And you're so far away, but so big. I know you're going to say at the back thinking you're going to have a snooze, but I'm not going to allow you to snooze. This is not going to be a half hour of a wannabe business person. This is not going to be one of those tomes that you see in the bookshelves of the business world, which is 5-minute management, 1-minute management, throwing everything against the walls management. This is powerful stuff I'm talking to you about. This is probably what you're not ever being taught in business school. This is talking about fascism within the financial institutions. This talks about criminality within major corporations. This talks to you about how you bring the spirit of your life, your culture, your values into the workplace, and you darn well cling onto them. Because one of the great lies perpetuated by the business schools in America, followed by almost every business school around the world, is that the function of business is to accumulate wealth. The function of business is to garner the profits for such a few group of people. Well, I challenge every one of those precepts, and I'm going to show you, rather than just being rhetorical in the challenges, how I've tried to do it a different way. Now, I have a slideshow, which worries me a bit because I don't think you can see a thing on there. So if anybody's in charge of dimming the lights, please can we dim the lights so that you can see the slide. I don't care about anything else, but this is important because within 5 minutes of hearing me, you're going to be bored. So here I come, out of a 3-month tour around the world, talking about, oh my God, business as unusual. And I've had wonderful experiences. I've been in Dublin, where there are the true poets, and daft as brushes, anybody from Southern Ireland. A woman came up to me with 6 books for me to sign, which I gladly signed until I realized they were for her cats. And then going into some of the groups as I've traveled in New Zealand, where people are coming up to me, thousands and thousands, saying, this is the language, this is what we need to hear, and why aren't we hearing it in the media? So first of all, you're going to hear a bit about entrepreneurship, but you're never going to study this in the book, in the annals of this of business books, because I think what you're not being taught about in entrepreneurs is that we're nuts, we're totally crazy. That people who are entrepreneurs have more in common with a crazy person than they ever have with anything that you can be taught in business schools. We see visions. Crazy people see visions. The only thing that we do differently is that we can articulate those visions. We cannot stand hierarchy. We cannot manage ourselves out of a paper bag. What we are thought people. We vomit ideas like the genie in the bottle and have no value at all unless somebody that's organized in process can run behind us and galvanize those ideas and make them work. We're also absolutely obsessional about the nature of freedom. For us, our life is about freedom, having a canvas that we can put our thumbprint on, and shaping our sense of balance. Now, the other bizarre thing in the culture of this country is that we don't give a toss about money. You know, for us, the accumulation of wealth is of no value at all. It's the cheekiness of having an idea and pushing it and pushing it and pushing it to see how far it can go. And hopefully, the money that you make by the selling of these products will actually oil those wheels. We never thought, and never still do, never think that business is what it is now, seen as financial science. It's about trading. It's about the honorable, the oldest form of exchange, the bartering, the exchange, the buying and the selling, and that magical place where it works, in my case, the shops, and hopefully people giving us some profit for what they're buying. We also never believed that, life is no more complicated than love and work. You were not put on this planet. Let me tell you, you were not put on this planet to keep the economy vital. You were not put on this planet to produce marketed goods for other people to buy. You were put on this planet to learn how to love, to have relationships, your relationship with the cosmos, your relationship with the planet, your relationship, your understanding, your joy, your sense of wonderment and awe. That's what you were put on the planet for. And it is bizarre today when we have cultures for the first time in our cultural history, the very first time, where economic values have superseded every other human value. So just by listening to these words, you know that I come onto this platform not as a normal business person, but one as a renegade business leader. A leadership that has been fashioned, totally influenced by the fact that I'm an activist and an agitator. So, in the words of my friend Gloria Steinem, if we come here today and there's no trouble tomorrow, I haven't done my job or you haven't done your jobs. But I've been in business for some 24 years, and with the zealousness of a religious convert, what I've tried to do is put altruism back on a business agenda. I have founded, I am told, one of the world's top brands, number 27, I am told. And some of the times it felt really fraudulent because anything you do that is instinctive is never seen as remarkable. Other times it feels like management by falling apart at the seams, which I wanted to call the book, but they said, no, you have to be more triumphant when you come to America. So the triumph of Anita Roddick galls a bit when half the time it was, running here and there, throwing everything against the wall and seeing what sticks. But I look back and I see what was remarkable. in those last 24 years, and I'll tell you what it was. While many businesses were pursuing business as unusual, I was part of a very small, different movement that was sort of like ideas that were having wings. We were part of a business group of people, not only business people, but philanthropists. We were part of venture capitalists, non-government organizations, and saw that business had a different agenda, and it was idealism. It was more about public good than private greed. And I believe, and still believe, that the Body Shop was one of those architects of that social responsibility in business movement. So we have, after 24 years, a proven track record that you can, in many times, not at the moment, many times keep your financial investors happy. And you can open up 150 shops a year. And you can give back to the community, and you can make great products. And you can open up your doors and corral millions of customers, leverage millions of people on issues that are not ever talked about in the malls of America or the high streets or the main streets. Human rights, social justice, environmental issues, and leveraging those customers to come in and do something about it. Many of us in businesses, when we travel, as I do, and get out of the chair and out of the office and move, we start to have this growing disquiet about what these financial institutions have sort of bought into. And much of what we're seeing is that there is an enormous disaster out there. And we're seeing for ourselves that the biggest catastrophe that all of us have to face is poverty. So some of us see for ourselves what's going on. Some of the time, like me, I go out to see if I can find ingredients to put in our products, to set up community trade initiatives, sometimes just to see what is going on. And this was a sign I saw outside of Los Angeles airport some years ago by your own, really well-respected installation artist. Go where people sleep and see if they're safe. And 4 years ago, I traveled through the Great American Divide. I traveled and I went through Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and Georgia to get my first look at poverty in this country. To be poor is a disaster anywhere, but to be poor in this country, this land of so much wealth and plenty, is an anomaly. I traveled with a vagabond, and I traveled and I lived every night. I stayed in huts and shacks. Every night, every day, when I visited these shacks, I saw a new shadow economy being set up. And it was the illegal drug industry. It was unregulated, uncontrolled, and it was using a language that we use so pertinently in business, total quality management, that terrorism, if ever I heard or saw one, niche markets, quality products. And this was, I thought, a direct example as a result of a world that is run and controlled by the world, by the globalization. This is what happens in the shadow economy. People are living any life at all, trying to live purposeful lives. And when capital takes flight, and when corporations move to these passive and docile workers, what do they leave behind? They leave behind toxic waste, they leave behind embittered workers, and they leave behind, more than anything else, a sense of hopelessness. And that was bizarre. When years ago we thought with the civil rights movement things would be different. 2 weeks ago, before I started on this journey on talking about business as unusual, I spent a week with the Black Farmers Federation in Georgia and Alabama and Mississippi. And I went there specifically to do two things, to see whatever they could grow for us that we could put in our products. And we've seen some really good ideas, but also to see what happens to this almost an endangered species. What happens when you have an economy of such poverty of imagination and spiritual poverty that you have the demise of the black family farm and nobody gives a toss. You have an endangered species, the family farm, and 2 billion people around the world living on less than $2 a day, and nobody cares. And I'm wondering, as I traveled then and as I travel through today, there are two industries that actually could do something about that. One is the alcohol industry, and alcohol is always prevalent, high profile in distressed communities, and what it does is really effective. It keeps people's sense of discontentment, which moves into energy for action. It keeps it down. It just dampens it. And the other one, which was bizarre and paradoxical, was television. Almost every home I stayed in, 24 hours, what was playing was stupid things like Hollywood squares and the rich and famous in America, not using television as a tool to give people the information to get out of poverty. Not using that at all, and that dampens you. That dampens that sense of outrage. And yet poverty, which is the real issue, is a taboo subject in this country and is ignored by the media, it's ignored by governments, it's definitely ignored by policymakers, educational programs, and it is definitely ignored in business courses. But I believe it is both foolish and dangerous to ignore poverty, because when you act in such a revolting way, people revolt, as they did in Seattle. I'm probably one of the few international business leaders that actually was on the side of the protesters. And thanks to the enormously generous advance of Business as Unusual, I helped set up a 4-day program, educational free program, that where every school, where every labor union, where every auditorium was opened up for the people, the citizens of Seattle, to hear the story, the real story about economic globalization. So I was tear gassed and I was baton charged by the American policemen at that November protest march last year. We were some 700 organizations, moving between 60 to 80,000 people that took part in the protests against the World Trade Organization. We were determined, we were educated, and we were organized. We were, amongst others, we were human rights activists. We were battlefield enemies. You know, the environmental groups walking hand in hand with the unions. We were religious people, indigenous people, labor activists. We were environmentalists, workers, grandmothers, kids, grandfathers, mums and dads. We had kids dressed as monarch butterflies. We had Art and Revolution, a great group that just made puppets, just to in a way to dampen that sense of aggression. We were totally unprepared. As we entered, it reminded me of when I taught history years ago, when I taught about the First World War and the first group of soldiers that left England to fight their war in Flanders, carrying with them their little picnic baskets, thinking, oh, we'll have a little war this weekend and then we'll hop home. And we were unprepared. We weren't prepared for the tear gas. We weren't prepared. We didn't have our handkerchiefs soaked with vinegar. We didn't put the toothpaste on. And I believe that this unbelievable right to stand up for a citizen to keep his mouth open, the citizen to rightfully protest if they think they're within iniquitous organization, is our undeniable right. But you listen to the press now of any people's right or person's right to protest, you're equating it with the word terrorism. Words create the worlds, Wittgenstein said. Words create the worlds. And if any form of outrage or protest in any street, in any city, you are being deemed and criticized as terrorists, you remind them that some of the greatest civil rights movements, some of the greatest human rights movement, some of the greatest human development in history was a people's right to stand up and protest. So what was the protest about? It all came down to this. This was the issue, a world trade system that failed to put human rights, social justice, and concern for the environment at the very core of every trading relationship. That was a protest in a nutshell. All we were demanding was to make businesses more thoughtful, more respectful, more reflective. In short, a revolution in kindness. That's why I believe that when you do not regulate businesses, they can become, and they do, become criminal. This is the stuff I take personally. I take the way big businesses are shaving away my sovereign rights. I take away personally my government's total inability to evolve a corporate code of governance. I take personally when I hold mutated babies genetically handicapped by toxic waste streams, and by golly do I take personally the way businesses can ride roughshod over indigenous people. There is not one line, one word in GATT, NAFTA, any other economic piece of paper that protects indigenous people's intellectual property rights. Not one. I take these things personally, and I take really personally the way businesses are almost totally and utterly morally indifferent to this. I remember being invited to do a talk a few years back at the International Chamber of Commerce in Cancun. And I'm invited for a number of reasons. I'm invited because I have a quote-unquote global brand. I'm invited because I'm a token woman, more often than not. I'm invited because I'm eloquent and smart, and they'll get a good deal for their money. What I never do is prepare them for what I'm saying. If I did, I guarantee I would never be invited. And I have showed them slides of when I went into the Sarawak with the Penang people, who were doing a human blockade, stopping the 24-hour logging by Mitsubishi. And I show them slides of these indigenous people, and I show them slides of their passivity. And I had gone in just to give monies to, for the high-8 cameras and for food. And I remember arriving in secretly into Sarawak with a pair of deck shoes and a pair of shorts, totally unprepared for walking 14 hours in primal rainforest where every route is there to break your neck, crossing fords, ravines of 70 foot high on logs. I cannot swim. I'm frightened of heights. I like my little pillow. I like my shower. I am Miss Middle Class, middle-aged, fearsome. But going into these situations, it's the experience that changes your values. And as I was showing these slides to the International Chamber of Commerce, I also showed them slides of the tobacco fields with the Huichol, who are indigenous to the Sierra Madres in Mexico. All the babies that were being born were born with no genitalia because of the pesticides used in the tobacco fields. Now, the reaction, what was the reaction? Hundreds and hundreds of people. There was none. There was almost, as Gandhi used to refer to it, it's a timid kindness, a timidity that cannot take this outrage, this notion of shame, and convert that to action. And that was really chilling for me, because these were the people who could do something about it. These were the international business people, and their purpose and their work, they can transcend barriers, countries, not just on the pursuit of business, but in terms of security and education and the environment. Business leaders are the world's first global citizens, and as such, they have such worldwide capabilities and responsibilities. And our decisions have to be moral decisions. I believe if business comes with no moral sympathy or honorable code of behavior, then God help us all. And if businesses, what used to be the right for communities to trade equally with each other, is now the right about the license for the big and the powerful and the global and the rich to ride roughshod over any communities or people who have no choice whether or not they want to trade. So what we have now, at this day, in this year and this millennia, around the world, we have a new kind of trading system that acts as a kind of uncontrollable world government. Let me just, there we go, sorry, I don't do this. There we go. There we go. And it is the World Trade Organization, and it is a group of totally unelected officials who run it. They are now effectively the world's highest court. They have the right to overturn any rule, any local law, any safety law on my environment or health, if they deem it interferes with trade. It is a blind government. It cannot see anything else other than the financial bottom line. It cannot see human rights. It cannot see social justice. It cannot see protection of that silent stakeholder, the environment. It is a government without a heart. And any time you have any organization without a heart, you will see instantly the diminishment of the human spirit. So the massive protests in Seattle stopped the World Trade Organization from grabbing some areas of global power. But now that the dust has settled, they're trying it again. The World Trade Organization wants to give business to control our basic services, healthcare, education, water. And if they can't make profits out of the poor, then the poor don't get the services. The World Trade Organization agreement is called GATS, G-A-T-S, and there is a worldwide campaign building to stop the GATS catastrophe. GATT stands for the General Agreement of Trade in Service. It aims to remove any law or regulation that restricts profits from the multinational companies who can make out of selling services. And now, services, as defined by the World Trade Organization, is, quote, this: anything you can't drop on your foot. And this covers an amazing array of 160 different service sectors, from healthcare to architecture, education to tourism, water supply to waste disposal. And when businesses can roam from country to country with few restrictions in search of the most passive and docile workers, with the loosest environmental regulations, and with the destruction of livelihoods and cultures, the results are terrifying. It is the survival of the economically fittest, and their interpretation of the fit, the marketable, the profitable, the sort of global, is pathetically inadequate. It's a kind of fascism, really, and I'm not overstating that. The financially fit survive. Those who don't fit, the poor, the farmers, the marginalized, are bled dry. It's a devastating machine that cannot bear any variation, and it will not build the kind of world I want for my grandkids, or my kids, or you want for your future lives. I want, as many of us do in business, want a financial bottom line that includes human rights, social justice, and the environment. I want to be penalized if I make a mess and don't clean up. I don't want to be part of this group of businesses that go on whinging and whining about ever decreasing standards and looser regulations. I don't want to allow any product coming into my home. Likewise, your government should not allow any product coming into this country or my country that has human rights or social justice abuses or sweatshop labor attached to it. We should not allow this to happen. It should be a moral standard. We should say, if our action as a human being could be corralled and shaped as criminal and therefore penalized if we did this as a human being, one to the other, we should not allow corporations to act the same. So, however, I am hopeful. I'm Italian and optimistic, and when have you ever met a miserable Italian? You've probably met them venal, and you've probably seen them self-absorbed and highly terrifying in many ways, but you've never met a dull Italian. And my two areas of hope is this. My first hope is that you have a new kind of customer out there, one that's acting more like an ethical watchdog than a hungry consumer. And they are a growing movement of people, and hopefully many of you here, who are choosing not to buy from companies when you know the story behind their products. And they are also saying they do not want to buy anything that has child labor or sweatshop labor unless they have proof that the government, that corporations are actually working to build conditions of safety and health within the factories. I choose not to buy from certain jeans manufacturers. I know the story. I choose not to buy from Kohl. I choose not to buy from Walmart. I make my choices. I choose not to buy from Total because of their business practices in Burma or Unical or Nigeria, in Shell of their practices in Nigeria. I make my choices. Now, what does that make me? That makes me this, a vigilante consumer. And I believe nobody here in marketing or business should ever underestimate this power of the vigilante consumer, because our activities are going a long way further than just simply refusing to buy. We are campaigning, funding, and advocating for change. No company can afford to ignore these vigilante consumers. Remember a few years ago about the consumer assaults on L'Oreal and Gillette on the animal rights issue within the cosmetic industry. Now they are being joined together by the human rights lobby, who are joining belly to belly with the ethical investors, consumer boycotters, direct action specialists who are spotting the so-called business agenda, and therefore, in my view, rightly making business, not governments, business a target of protest. And then, this is something you're not being taught about in the media, there is this enormous new community movement, the rise of the NGOs, the non-government organizations, who were once a small band of charities raising money for the poor in Africa, have grown into one of the most vastly influential sectors in this world. When I was in Seattle, I was talking to a Shell official, and he said to me this. He said, "We don't fear restriction or regulations anymore. What we fear is consumer revolt." One question from Greenpeace was, by fax, not even a threat, by fax, forced a food manufacturer in 1999 to take out all the genetically modified ingredients out of baby food. One fax. It was Indonesian non-government organizations that helped bring down the dictator, President Suharto. So there's my one ray of hope, this growing popular movement of ethical consumers alongside this huge growth of the non-government organization. Now, my second hope is this, community trade. I believe if governments or global planning economic institutions are to help, they have to put the poor first as active participants, as advisors and leaders. And any institution that mobilizes its grassroots is a light at the end of the tunnel, because the only true experts on poverty are the poor. So as a result, I'm a passionate believer in small-scale economic initiatives. Now, many of you here may think, viewed in isolation, get a life. These aren't that big. A few women guys digging a well in Africa, a few women planting trees in India, an old guy teaching kids up in a Peruvian mountain how to read. But if you take it from a global perspective, their impact and scale is enormous. It's almost like closing your eyes and seeing this vast ragtag line of grassroots organizations circling the globe, pushing back environmental degradation and keeping communities intact. And I'd give you a couple of examples of what we do in my company, The Body Shop. We have a real belief in setting up and establishing cooperatives, working alongside fair trade associations, where we have a special purchasing process where we buy directly from the community. A few years ago, I was visiting Ghana and looking at the shea butter cooperatives. They're all groups of farmers who are growing shea butter and cocoa butter. I love Ghana. Ghana is magical as a West country, African country. Ghana is where it's mostly matrilineal. All information and knowledge passes through the women. When a young girl is born, she's raised to the heavens, and the village celebrates, giving swathes of cloths and food and fruit. Little boy is born, it's off to work we go. But also in Ghana, they have such a notion of beauty that actually baffles anybody in the West. And likewise, they're baffled by Western notion of perfection, physical perfection. They can't quite understand why we all need to look like a coat hanger, where they have a belief that to be beautiful, you have to be as rotund and as magnificent as the mountains and the valleys, and actually, to be really beautiful, you have to walk like your bum is chewing gum. So I'm a great sympathy with Ghanaian women and Ghanaian notion of beauty. So going there, we saw cocoa butter and shea nut. And what we do is we then put it directly into our products. I'm a company that makes thousands of skincare products. They are not the body and blood of Jesus Christ. They are emulsions, they're potions, they're lotions. All they do is clean, polish, and protect. There are no values inherent within a skincare product. No values. Not the value of life or joy or celebration or awe. So my tension to myself over the years was, how do you bring a value stream into a product line that is essentially not valuable? I mean, it's not food, it's not medicine. And I found one or two ways, and one of the most effective way is to look at it up for ingredients where you go into the past and use it as a prologue for ideas, and you buy those ingredients directly from cooperatives or fair trade associations that work directly within the communities, mostly in the developing world. And we have some nearly 39 suppliers in 20 countries, and they are informal groups, cooperatives, or fair trade associations. So we work with some 7,000 families, and that doesn't include the thousands and thousands of families that benefit from the education, the information on HIV and AIDS awareness, clinics and fresh water. So we put these issues out in our trucks, and we celebrate that because we don't know what else to do with our trucks. Putting Body Shop skin and hair care is pretty boring. But by themselves, these initiatives will not transform the global economy. But what they do is transforms my company's way of doing business. It's about responsibility and about how you humanize that process of doing trade. And I would rather, let me tell you, hand on heart, I would rather be measured for the numbers of community trade projects I have than ever be measured by the variations of my share price. Then let me tell you of another one, which is in southern India, in Tamil Nadu, which has been the poorest, one of the poorest states. And what they have, you find in that area, of acacia trees, which they used to cut down for firewood. What we're doing now is cutting down just the branches, and with some very simple wood turning, make these millions of wooden massage rollers for us. So 500 people are employed on this campus. They are mostly predominantly female workers, which were previously unskilled agricultural workers. They're employed on a casual basis, usually with no security, so that there's no caste system. And what they've done with these thousands and thousands of products that they make for us, first thing they do is they build a school. 190 kids in this Montessori school. Kids that then we bring in the disabled kids. We also bring our teachers, take our teachers into Tirumangala and teach the kids in the sweatshops, in the matchbox factories. And we also have a brilliant, brilliant program to teach women in the sex industry out of that profession into another one. They have a veterinary clinic built in Teddy campus. 17,000 livestock were treated. And they have the best HIV and AIDS awareness program, which is directed as a clinic, sexually transmitted AIDS clinic, right by a gas station. It's truck drivers that pass on AIDS in India, and so we have the condoms, we have freely given, we have the videos on play, we have the doctors doing the examinations. And when the truckers park their vehicles and wait for the gas tanks to fill up, they usually take women over a wall and have their way. That's when our merry band of young medics jump over the wall, tap them on the shoulder, offer them a free condom, the best form of coitus interruptus in southern India, and it works. Now, compare this to one of the biggest, most powerful multinationals in Nigeria. Let me just put this in. Let me do this. Where billions of dollars of profits are made for the company and its shareholders, where billions of barrels of oil are extracted out of an area called Ogoniland in the river state, where 500,000 unrepresented people in a nation have the teachers, the nations used to be the nations, Nigeria's teachers and poets and writers, have never received 1 penny back in compensation of the oil drilled in that land. Everywhere I traveled when I was there in November, there were oil flares. Everywhere. It's much cheaper, it's much easier to let these gas affect the respiratory system of young kids than it is to patch it up. It's too expensive. Or look at this one. This is as you go around into the various kingdoms, as you pass through the villages, oil seeping all through the villages. Or this one, as you go into the schools, to how the kids are making their desks, and now they're fashioning on the walls with Flint's letters. This used to be the nation's teachers and writers and poets. Or look at this one. This is a hospital I visited and took this photograph where 50,000 people are looked after, so-called, where women were having cesareans without any anesthetic, and where you could open up a refrigerator and find 3 or 4 serums. End of story. Tell me about this. Does it move your spirit? Does it send you into a sense of this is outrageous, this I don't want to be part of the system that in a way institutionalizes this business thinking? Is this right? Is this criminal behavior? Is this of such low standard in our sense of what is right and just, wherever religion you come from, Christianity, Buddhism, Judaism, Islam? Isn't this outrageous? But this is the way we do business. And when I'm asked by the media consistently, but how can you run? Tell me this, how can you run an ethical company and still be profitable? Let's just turn this word around. Let's deconstruct it. Let's move that sentence around. Does that mean then to be profitable, you have to be unethical, which means rapacious, lie, cheat, steal? Well, what about the Quakers a century and a half ago? You know, some of Europe's greatest business people, most successful, religious, never stole. Never took out more money than what they put in. My golly, doesn't that say a lot to shame some of the CEOs in this country with their obscene compensation packages? And they looked after their stakeholder, the community of the workforce. They built homes for them. They built schools for them. They cared about them. You couldn't find a child development center, you know, in this country, maybe one in Patagonia. But I've never seen a child development center attached to the workplace. What about the protection? This is de rigueur now in business. So for me, when we were asked by Ken Saro-Wiwa some years back to help raise the awareness in our shops, in our hundreds of shops we had around the world, to raise this issue on the plight of the Ogoni people, which we did. We turned our shops into action stations, those that we had extra rooms. This is a shop in Boulder, Colorado. And we put information on the plight of the Ogoni and the Shell. We had fax machines, so our customers and our staff could fax directly, not only Shell, but also the Ogoni people, to support them, also Nigerian embassy. And we actually allowed our staff out to picket the Nigerian embassy and to picket Shell previous to Ken Saro-Wiwa being judiciously murdered by the then despotic government. No, how do you allow this to happen? People say, but what's this to do with making skincare? It has everything to do with developing the human spirit within the confines and the protection of a workplace. We do not have an educational system that polishes this notion of wonderment and awe and social justice and compassion. This notion of compassion, this caring for the weak and the frail. We don't have it in our educational system. What we have in our educational system is training young people to be consistently passive and docile, come down that conveyor belt to get a job, but guess what? There's rarely jobs at the end of it. This is not a job creation economy. This is a wealth creating economy. And then so people said to me, this is not what business is about. This is everything about having a Monday to Friday living rather than a Monday to Friday death. This is about polishing this human spirit, and this is about the protection in your daily work that you're allowed to do this, and you're educated beyond the education of how to make a widget work faster. So we've called this the politics of consciousness, and many people, many certainly financial people would say, this is, you're really stupid doing this stuff. This is not what we should be about. And I think maybe what people call is stupid, I think is fearless. And I have to say our campaigns are really deemed that. Either brave or either stupid. And because there is a consistent drop in sales whenever we advertise through our shop windows any of these issues, human rights, social justice, voter registration, or whatever, there is a drop. You know, so what? There's a drop. That's why companies never copy us. And that's why this is not cause-related marketing. But I wish to golly the 4 million people that came into our shops in England to change the law in England on the issue of animal testing within the cosmetic industry had also bought a product. That would have been really cool. Or the 12 million people that banded together around the world on supporting our human rights defenders with Make Your Mark. 12 million people put their thumbprint on defending human rights. That does not translate to, guess what, 12 million people buying body butters. No, I wish it could, but it isn't. And it's, I think, disingenuous to think that this type of work on marketing issues is about getting and corralling your customers to buy more products. So this notion of politics of consciousness is starting to bubble up in America. It's starting to bubble up certainly in the universities, and it is this issue that is causing more outrage than any other issue. Nowhere is the public outrage displayed more than in this reaction to child labour. We have ample proof that the worst forms of child labour, children are being used and as slaves. They are bought, they are sold. They are tortured, they are confined to the workplace, and they're unable to leave their jobs. Whether it's kids working in a brick kiln, or whether it's working as bonded farm labour, or kids in sexual slavery being used as human cargo for sexual purposes. And when you see this huge rise in the tourist industry, the dark side, the shadow side, is prostitution, child prostitution. You'll find that countries like Thailand, there are now more prostitutes than there are monks. This is a direct mentality that puts economic values overriding every other human value. And this is a direct mentality where countries, government leaders are no longer measuring their strength, measuring their strength by how they look after the weak and the frail. So for me, I believe that what we have to do in business now is to show more developed emotions in fear and greed. I take this personally. Please God, you take this personally. We have to make sure that companies and products and services that we're selling and people are buying show more developed emotion. We have to also make sure that thousands of people who are working in the disciplines of marketing and advertising take their vast reserves of creative gift to be able to do something, to raise this notion up, and to let people have this understanding. Because this is not talked about. This is not talked about in many of the newspapers. It's what it does, its fashions and shapes, maybe a loss of revenue in terms of their advertising. When it comes down to sort of interpretation of social problems within the arena of the beauty business, the Body Shop has had some fun. And for me, it's a lot to do with this graphic design. And I love the ancient art of illustration and graphic design. And I've always managed to elicit some fun from it. And so let me show you a couple of examples of how we've had some fun with the art of dissent. We put a really generously proportioned doll called Ruby, short for Rubenesque, on our windows in 1998. And that was supposed to remind people of that beauty is about confidence. It was about self-esteem. And I know many of you think, oh, this is a wishy-washy subject. It's not. Self-esteem is the route to revolution. It is, let me tell you, it's about self-knowledge, self-worth, it's political activism. This is not something about people's absorption with their self. So we had some really interesting information from America, which was when young kids, young girls open up a fashion magazine, they're instantly depressed. And you had countries like Argentina, where some 70% of all young girls are anorexic under the age of 14 or bulimic. A big disaster, this. And the industry has been propelling it for years, the beauty and the fashion industry, because they're really smart. It's a strategy that's worked, which is basically alienate young women from their bodies, control their minds, and you control their minds, and guess what? You can control what they buy. And if you take a look at any of the messages within the beauty or fashion industry, the repeated message is mostly shut up, get a facelift, and diet. And oh, by the way, if you have crow's feet and dimples on your thighs, then onto the trash heap of life you go. This is a continued message, and it is maybe an oversimplification, but it is dangerous and it is immature and it works. So we came up with Ruby, and Ruby we thought was fabulous. So we had an educational campaign. Within weeks, we had a very serious letter from Mattel, who told us to cease and desist because, to quote, we were being disrespectful to Barbie. So we changed her to this. Let me see if she's here. And we immediately got into trouble in the mass transit of Hong Kong. They said this was offensive. And one of the malls in Chicago told us to take it down because it was pornographic. I have to say, when you're sitting next to shops like Victoria's Secret, this is pornographic. So maybe business has to take a bit more responsibility. Maybe. If we don't have an educational system that challenges what we're seeing, or what we're hearing, or what we're reading. It doesn't challenge the language of the ads. Maybe, if it doesn't challenge in any book, in any school, and I don't know about the high schools in this country, but do they ever sit down and talk about ethics instead of something really boring like what happens with a bit of corruption going on here, a bit of bribery here, the real issues of social alienation and poverty and you know, just no jobs. I don't think they talk about that well enough in the ethics classes. The consumers, what we have is, the French would describe a bourgeois society, where the wealthy are now shaping everything. We see that in the gated communities, we see that in celebrity and entertainment obsession. I don't know what we're lacking. We're lacking a sense of, what we're lacking is a diminishment of the human spirit. And I somehow have got an answer to this, and it's about something in my own life. I know wealth came to me too late. It came to me in my early 40s. So I was shaped as an activist well before that, decades and decades before that. But I know one thing that happens when wealth hits you. It corrodes your human spirit. It diminishes your sense of empathy with the human condition. That's what it does. Like it or not, it happens. No matter how much you can say you're philanthropic, it happens. We don't have an understanding or a care. We pass the poor in the street. We don't act as Christians should do, i.e. protecting the weak and the frail. So I think with this ever-increasing wealth, which we have for a certain level of people in our societies, that diminishment is happening, that sense of no longer an outrage. Outrage is no longer de rigueur. Sense of changing the way things are, getting out. When did we last stand up and protest? What would we protest for? What would be the things to take a wealthy, comfortable person to stand up and protest? Maybe what you saw was a reflection in this election where the biggest reaction to the inaugural speech, which I thought was charming in many ways, was this reaction to the loss of tax, or the lessening of taxes. It's all about the self. So the rugged individualism that Bush and Reagan and Thatcher had has not translated, I believe, to community thinking or community care. So I would, because I just see the enemy out there, and I would say there's more responsibility in business, because I think more than any other institution, they are more powerful now. And the consumers or the customers, and why call them consumers? I've tried to ban that word in my company. Can't we just call them the old-fashioned word like customers? Why not just say human beings and see what we think about? But this notion that we were put on this earth just to consume, by this repetition of the word, yeah, education has to be, moral education. But is it going to happen? Probably not. Yes, sir.
My name is Tom Chepikavich. I'm a senior in the undergraduate business school. I was wondering how you propose dealing with the opportunity cost of changing the media. For example, the Super Bowl, a commercial, 30-second commercial cost $2 million, and the United Way was all over that, spending millions of dollars, I assume. Maybe they were allowed a smaller price, but the opportunity cost of changing the media as opposed to putting that money towards good.
Well, I think what you would be really great to look at is guerrilla marketing groups. You know, you take a look when people shop. They never shop with their eyes like that, or they never shop with their eyes. They shop with their eyes to the ground. They weren't making sure they're not going to tread on something. I think guerrilla tactics, putting things on pavements, putting things on wall, fly posting. I think, you know, when we have a look at these big media opportunities, so-called, which is, your election, how many billions of dollars were spent in marketing, in advertising, and the media, in the television? $2 billion. I mean, what could we have done with education? I could have taken that down to the Black Farmers Federation in a nanosecond. I don't know how you change that. I think it's happening very much with certain TV ads. I'm sitting in a friend's house last night and I'm zapping. I don't want to watch one darn ad because they're dull. I read ads in if you've ever seen that wonderful magazine called, what's the one in Canada? Adbusters. Have you ever seen Adbusters? Any of you in marketing have to buy Adbusters. So I don't know the answer to that other than guerrilla tactics, people just not wanting to watch. I think the biggest obscenity in advertising now is the billboards. We work and have a marketing group in San Francisco. The entire skylines of San Francisco have gone. It's billboards. It's Gap City. It's Nike City. And their civil space that's being taken up by ads, people are outraged. Naomi Klein says it in her book, No Logo. People no longer want their civil space to be taken over by brands. And there is a brand war out there. People don't want bigness. They want high profile in the community. They want to know that businesses are doing something good, but they just don't want their civil space being taken over. So, have you any ideas?
No.
Oh, come on.
Well, I would say government regulation of the media, government intervention, reducing the cost, maybe providing subsidized.
But wouldn't it be great if the government said, hey, wouldn't it be great if one city, God, I wish it was Santa Barbara where I live, that said, no more ads. We're just going to have aphorisms, poetry, quotes from kids, just, this notion of, like the Jenny Holson's thing, go where people sleep and see if they're safe, just to jog people's sense of compassion. And wouldn't that look amazing if we had poetry on the subways, poetry on the billboards? Anyway, that's not going to happen, but it's a nice thought.
Thank you.
Any more? Well, thank you very... Oh, yes, one more, yes.
I'm sorry. Again, thank you very much. That was a very good speech. And
thank you.
Just, well, you said that you were optimistic about student-led demonstrations, and you're right, they do have a voice, but the one thing that they do not have is money. And, companies like Body Shop and others that are in the front of moral business practices, is there a coalition? Is there anything that they are doing to support such movements, or is there proposals towards other organizations that are that have elected officials and not organizations like the WTO or IMF, etc.?
There's 2 or 3 organizations in this country which are starting to have more of an edge to them. Businesses for Social Responsibility, which was an arm that came out of Social Venture Network, which were a group of business philanthropists, social entrepreneurs, businesses, NGOs, really coming together with a remit to making businesses more thoughtful. And a profound organization that is, and learning a lot from the business practices in Scandinavia, primarily. There's also really good groups like the International Forum on Globalization, but these are non-government organization groups. There isn't really the direct response to the Chamber of Commerce, which are actually the processors of the World Trade Organization in many ways, I would say would be the corporate responsibility groups like Businesses for Social Responsibility. But in terms of networking, we're tending to network across with strategic alliances. We're tending more now not to network with other businesses so much as learning from non-government organizations or learning from public policy. And really some of the most profound thinking is being done by government practices in Scandinavia. And we're also looking to the past. One of the things that gives this movement credibility is the historic imperative. And, you can't argue when somebody from business talks to me about, maximizing profits, and I can quote, Queen Elizabeth I in 15-something or other, when she only gave the merchants the right to trade in England if they gave a really big percentage back to the community, and that was 500 years ago. So there's lots of ways that we can corral, I think, a sense of authenticity about this movement. The most important thing, though, is to change language. The language is pivotal. So we have got to stop allowing, and Kennedy said it so brilliantly. He said the opposite to the lie, the opposite to truth is not the lie deliberate and provoked. It is almost the ability to take these, and he didn't say this because I'm paraphrasing, it's the myth, taking the myth, and which is considered to be truth by repetition. That's what has to happen. And when you talk about consistently in the business world, we have to maximize our profits. We have to maximize profit. The business of businesses to financial resource, whatever. That's what we've got to challenge. And when we take words like, from the words in the language of accountancy or economics, and economics are a really eerie thing. When I was a kid, economics or economists were professions. Now suddenly they've metamorphosed into scientists, and nobody ever challenges scientists. And you take the words, the language of economics, and see how it comes into our language of relationships, like, how long have you invested in this relationship? Now what if we took the words of metaphysics, of the words of poetry, or the words of care or love or whatever, and segued that into the business lexicon? I wonder what would happen and how that would validate a new business way of thinking. But we have to first of all, I think, finally, challenge everything you are taught in business school. Everything you are taught as a valuable way of doing business. You have to keep your spirit so polished. You have to keep your sense of challenge so polished. And then you have to absolutely believe that for the time in your life that you're in business, which is most of your creative actions, where you build some of your biggest friendships and relationships, that you keep the spirit of responsibility and the divine spirit of what makes you a human being, human. You have to protect that because it is there totally to take it away. And that's not business schools. That is business as we are seeing it now in this century. Thank you.
Important part of the story. The important part I want to suggest to you is about how she did it and the example that she set in going about creating this business this way. The example I would offer to you is describable as this. She's proof positive that building a business and making money does not require that we abandon serious human values. Now, her new book, its title is shown behind me, chronicles both of these stories, the business story and the human story, and it does it with a passion that you don't normally see in CEO literature. In fact, I want to suggest to you that this doesn't qualify as CEO literature, because I read it this weekend and there was not one instance of chest-pounding, self-congratulatory platitudes in the entire book. What you do get in this book is you get to go inside the place. Not into the boardroom where you usually go. I doubt you guys even have a boardroom. Instead, you go into what the author describes as the original core of the business and of the woman whose life it reflects. In philosophy, we call this a soul. What you find in there is a very refreshing and hopeful message, and it's my extreme pleasure to introduce the author of that book, Anita Roddick.
Thanks. I love intimacies. And you're so far away, but so big. I know you're going to say at the back thinking you're going to have a snooze, but I'm not going to allow you to snooze. This is not going to be a half hour of a wannabe business person. This is not going to be one of those tomes that you see in the bookshelves of the business world, which is 5-minute management, 1-minute management, throwing everything against the walls management. This is powerful stuff I'm talking to you about. This is probably what you're not ever... Okay.
Well, welcome. My name is Ed Sewell, and on behalf of the Georgetown Business Ethics Institute, I'd like to welcome all of you here today. I'd like to also extend a special thanks to Ryan Connors, if he's here, for doing the publicity and a lot of the organization of this event. I'd also like to welcome our viewers from C-SPAN. In addition, I want to extend a very warm Georgetown welcome to today's speaker, who about 25 years ago opened a single shop in Brighton, England, with a business plan that I think a lot of you business majors in the room would admire. It said this, as best I can tell. It said, sell natural cosmetics in refillable containers. Tweak it as we go along. Very little capital. Very little, if any, industry experience, and most importantly, no discernible market for what she was up to. In other words, this business would have resembled the schematic for a bumblebee, a cute little thing, but no way is it going to fly. Well, it did fly. Today, the Body Shop operates out of 1,800 locations. It serves 84 million customers, which raises the obvious question, why? And how did that happen? I think the answer lies in the woman who's going to spend a little bit of time with us today, who did what I would suggest to you is arguably the hardest thing that anybody in business ever undertakes. And that is that she saw a market where one didn't exist. Moreover, she had the tenacity of a lunatic to make it real. This doesn't happen very often. And this is no small feat, but that's not, at least from my standpoint, the really
very first time where economic values have superseded every other human value. So just by listening to these words, you know that I come onto this platform not as a normal business person, but one as a renegade business leader. A leadership that has been fashioned, totally influenced by the fact that I'm an activist and an agitator. So, in the words of my friend Gloria Steinem, if we come here today and there's no trouble tomorrow, I haven't done my job or you haven't done your jobs. But I've been in business for some 24 years, and with the zealousness of a religious convert, what I've tried to do is put altruism back on a business agenda. I have founded, I am told, one of the world's top brands, number 27, I am told. And some of the times it felt really fraudulent because anything you do that is instinctive is never seen as remarkable. Other times it feels like management by falling apart at the seams, which I wanted to call the book, but they said, no, you have to be more triumphant when you come to America. So the triumph of Anita Roddick galls a bit when half the time it was, running here and there, throwing everything against the wall and seeing what sticks. But I look back and I see what was remarkable in those last 24 years, and I'll tell you what it was. While many businesses were pursuing business as unusual, I was part of a very small, different movement that was sort of like ideas that were having wings. We were part of a business group of people, not only business people, but philanthropists. We were part of venture capitalists, non-government organizations, and saw that business had a different agenda, and it was idealism. It was more about public good than private greed. And I believe, and still believe, that the Body Shop was one of those architects of that social responsibility in business movement. So we have, after 24 years, these visions. The only thing that we do differently is that we can articulate those visions. We cannot stand hierarchy. We cannot manage ourselves out of a paper back. What we are thought people. We vomit ideas like the genie in the bottle and have no value at all unless somebody that's organized in process can run behind us and galvanize those ideas and make them work. We're also absolutely obsessional about the nature of freedom. For us, our life is about freedom, having a canvas that we can put our thumbprint on, and shaping our sense of a balance. Now, the other bizarre thing in the culture of this country is that we don't give a toss about money. For us, the accumulation of wealth is of no value at all. It's the cheekiness of having an idea and pushing it and pushing it and pushing it to see how far it can go. And hopefully, the money that you make by the selling of these products will actually oil those wheels. We never thought, and never still do, never think that business is what it is now, seen as financial science. It's about trading. It's about the honorable, the oldest form of exchange, the bartering, the exchange, the buying and the selling, and that magical place where it works, in my case, the shops, and hopefully people giving us some profit for what they're buying. We also never believed that, life is no more complicated than love and work. You were not put on this planet. Let me tell you, you were not put on this planet to keep the economy vital. You were not put on this planet to produce marketed goods for other people to buy. You were put on this planet to learn how to love, to have relationships, your relationship with the cosmos, your relationship with the planet, your relationship, your understanding, your joy, your sense of wonderment and awe. That's what you were put on the planet for. And it is bizarre today when we have cultures for the first time in our cultural history that are being taught in business school. This is talking about fascism within the financial institutions. This talks about criminality within major corporations. This talks to you about how you bring the spirit of your life, your culture, your values into the workplace, and you darn well cling onto them. Because one of the great lies perpetuated by the business schools in America, followed by almost every business school around the world, is that the function of business is to accumulate wealth. The function of business is to garner the profits for such a few group of people. Well, I challenge every one of those precepts, and I'm going to show you, rather than just being rhetorical in the challenges, how I've tried to do it a different way. Now, I have a slideshow, which worries me a bit because I don't think you can see a thing on there. So if anybody's in charge of dimming the lights, please can we dim the lights so that you can see the slide. I don't care about anything else, but this is important because within 5 minutes of hearing me, you're going to be bored. So here I come, out of a 2 or 3 month tour around the world, talking about, oh my God, business as unusual. And I've had wonderful experiences. I've been in Dublin, where they're the true poets, and daft as brushes, anybody from Southern Ireland. A woman came up to me with 6 books for me to sign, which I gladly signed until I realized they were for her cats. And then going into some of the groups as I've traveled in New Zealand, where people are coming up to me, thousands and thousands, saying, this is the language, this is what we need to hear, and why aren't we hearing it in the media? So first of all, you're going to hear a bit about entrepreneurship, but you're never going to study this in the book, in the annals of this of business books, because I think what you're not being taught about in entrepreneurs is that we're nuts, we're totally crazy. That people who are entrepreneurs have more in common with a crazy person than they ever have with anything that you can be taught in business schools. We see visions, crazy people.